Hey everyone, this is FIDE Master Kostya Kavutskiy here for Chess.com's YouTube channel, and today I wanted to show you guys a sharp and quick game that has a couple of really instructive moments. So let's just get to it. This is the game I played last year in the first round of a relatively large open tournament, and I'm playing black here. And I decided to play the Nimzo Indian defense because it's a great opening. You get all your pieces out and you get good control over the center, and what else could you want? Okay, so my opponent played queen c2. This is one of the main lines, which you probably knew if you've seen our video on the Nimzo Indian defense. And the point of this move is that if black ever captures this knight on c3, white won't have to double their pawns, which, would be a defect in their structure, but it can instead take with their queen, keeping their pawn structure flexible. So now I played d5. This is one of the main responses to this move, just controlling the e4 square. White took on d5 and played bishop g5. Now c5. The reason I'm playing c5 early is because I am already very close to castling, and white's kingside development hasn't even started yet. So if I open up the center, I figure, I'll have good chances to take advantage of my opponent's lack of development, and if my opponent doesn't play carefully, then, he might get in trouble early on. So now knight f3 was played, h6, and he played bishop takes f6. So for those curious about the opening, the reason black plays this h6 move is that if white simply retreats his bishop to h4, then a lot of times black will play this g5 move, which looks risky, but it's important to break this pin so that once white plays bishop g3, black can play knight e4, putting a lot of pressure on the c3 knight. And next black will follow up with moves like queen a5 and knight c6, and white will have to solve some serious opening problems. But of course, that position is also playable for white since black has really weakened his kingside, and so it would basically just be a really sharp and unbalanced game. Instead, my opponent decided to take on f6, and here he took on c5. So this is kind of a double-edged decision. The reason that white takes on c5 is that he wants to leave black with an isolated d-pawn, which could later be weak and white can later attack. The drawbacks of this move is that it's opening up the position, which is not something you always want to do when your king is still in the center, especially since now black has the two bishops, including the very strong and unopposed dark-squared bishop. I say it's unopposed because white traded off his dark-squared bishop and now has no piece to fight for the dark squares. And as we'll see in the game is that this bishop played a very important role. So now I play bishop f5, and during the game I of course thought this was a good move because I'm developing a piece with a tempo on white's queen, and it's always good to sort of develop and create threats at the same time. But considering what happened in the next few moves, I think bishop e6 was a much stronger alternative. Just securing the d5 pawn and also developing the bishop to a reasonably good square. And next black can castle and play like knight d7 and take on c5 or rook c8 and have a really nice presence in the center. But instead I played bishop f5. My opponent played queen b3, hitting my bishop and the pawn. I played knight c6. Now white cannot take this pawn yet because c3 would be hanging, and that would be really bad for them. And now he played a move which I completely overlooked and is definitely a really strong move. He played the move long castles. So it's not often that you can overlook a move as simple as castling, but here, at first I figured that, well, with the queenside already being so open that, there's no way white could ever put his king on the queenside and expect to be safe. But this move also comes with some very concrete threats. Since the c3 knight is no longer pinned, it now comes to fruition that black has no way to stop knight takes d5, winning this important central pawn. And of course this is still double-edged for white. I mean, his king is on the queen side and his king is never going to really be safe over here, especially since, the c file will eventually be open and this bishop is always cutting off the escape path to a1. However, all that said, black has some very concrete problems, and if I just let white take this pawn for free, then white will not only have an extra pawn, but also have a pretty dominating presence in the center. This rook will be great, this knight will be super active on d5, and once they play e3 and this bishop gets out to perhaps c4, I think, black is going to have some serious issues proving that he has any kind of compensation for the pawn. So here the best move was queen e7, with the idea that if he takes on d5, then I can take on c5 with check, and then this f2 pawn is hanging. So black equalizes the material, and white's king still remains in an uncomfortable spot on c1. However, I decided to just play the most natural move, rook c8, just lining up my rook against white's king and hoping that I'll have some kind of tactical shot in the future, which is pretty much what happened since my opponent wasn't careful enough. So he played knight takes d5, queen e6, and now I want you guys to pause the video and try to find the strongest move for white in this position. Okay, so my opponent played the move e3, which is okay, but it's definitely not the best move. The best move here was e4. And sometimes you can find the strongest move simply by just taking stock of what's happening in the position and realizing that one tempo is sometimes all you need to get a decisive advantage. So the point of this move e4 is that he's opening up the path for his bishop to c4, where it's going to be really strong, lined up against my queen and this f7 pawn in the future. And because this move is hitting my bishop, it's winning a very important tempo that black would have otherwise liked to use for castling. So now I have to play bishop takes e4, and after bishop c4, white has a ton of threats, and black's position is very close to losing. This knight has a number of discoveries, and this rook is ready to come into the game and just wreak total havoc on my position. So that would have definitely been the way to go and the way to punish black for my sort of careless play. Instead, my opponent played e3, which is just a tad bit too slow. And here I set a pretty devious trap that my opponent fell for. So I took this pawn on c5, and the reason for this was to open up some kind of discovery attack against white's king and give me some kind of tactical chances. Obviously the game is going to be really sharp in the next few moves, and a lot of things are going to be hanging, so I figured it was a good idea to get this potential attack on the king ready. My opponent played bishop c4 as expected, and now I simply castled. So the trap was here that, since the bishop is lined up against my queen, the most natural move for white to look at here is knight b6. And if black simply does nothing and moves his queen away, then white can win the exchange and then look for a way to secure his king in the future. Maybe something like bishop d3 followed by king b1 and so on and so forth. But instead I played this move knight a5, counterattacking my opponent's queen. And here what my opponent figured was that after bishop takes e6, knight takes b3, bishop takes b3, bishop takes b6 check, king d2, white has an extra pawn, and although black has really good development and some active pieces, a pawn is a pawn and white doesn't have any real weaknesses, and within a couple moves, king e2, knight d4, he should be able to consolidate his position and just have an extra pawn in the endgame. But can you see what my opponent overlooked? Well, if you found the move bishop takes e3, double check, and mate, then you're right. And the point of this lecture is that you always need to be super, super aware of tactical possibilities from both your side and your opponent's side. My opponent didn't realize is that, his king was, of course, in total peril on c1. And when that happens, then stuff like this is possible. The bishop is checking, the rook is checking. There's no way to block both checks. There's no way to capture both pieces, even though both pieces are under attack by two other pieces. And there's nowhere to move the king, which means it's mate. After I played this move, it was kind of funny. My opponent sort of stared at the board for about 10 seconds, not realizing what just happened. And of course, he was shocked that I didn't take his queen. And then he muttered a curse word and said, "Good game." Thanks a lot for listening, and I'll see you around on Chess.com.